Every once in a while, a high school history project makes an impact. This particular story is not just about the 16-year-old student who decided to participate in a history project in 2015. It's also about the incredible story of heroism, family, and legacy. At the time, Vanessa Taylor was a student at Ainsworth High School in Nebraska. The task at hand was to select a silent hero from our state. Taylor, who's now a student at the University of Nebraska, explained. She began her research by looking through websites that listed soldiers killed in action from her state. To make a long story short, Taylor managed to reunite the bodies of two American twin brothers who'd been separated at death during World War II. But that would be a very, very short version of the story, and you'd be missing out on all the interesting details. Hello, wonderful people. I'm Scott Leffler for WonderBot, and here is how a high school student brought two World War II veterans together again. Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Around Christmas of 2014, Vanessa Taylor was selected, along with her teacher, Nicole Flynn, to participate in a Normandy project. Sacrifice for Freedom, Albert H. Small Student and Teacher Institute, that would take place the following summer. Taylor and Flynn were among 15 student-teacher pairs from across the country who were assigned to research the life of a silent hero from their state. But not just any hero, one who's buried in Normandy. The pairs were to prepare a website and presentation, and then finally to visit the actual grave. But what started out as a high school history project grew into something so much more meaningful than either Taylor or Flynn could have ever expected. As the teacher-student pair started doing their research, Taylor noticed something both peculiar and intriguing. I just happened to notice there were two people killed who had the same exact last name. So I thought it was kind of interesting, and I wondered if there was a connection or if it was just a coincidence. She discovered that the two men were twin brothers, Ludwig Julius Wilhelm, Louis Piper, and Julius Heinrich Otto, Henry Piper, who had served in the same branch of the military. They were even on the same ship when they died. And so Taylor found not one, but two silent heroes. Not only were these soldiers from the same town as her, she learned that their story wasn't so straightforward. It turns out that one brother was killed while the other went missing. As Taylor gathered information about Henry and Louis Piper from official archives and histories, she learned about the brothers. The twins were born on May 17, 1925 in Esmond, South Dakota, but grew up in Creston, Nebraska. Their parents, Otto and Anna Piper, were immigrants from Germany. The family of 8, with 6 children in total, moved to Creston when the twins were 8 or 9 years old. In Creston, all the children attended a public school, and the family became members of the St. Peter's Lutheran Church. Even from an early age, Henry and Louis did just about everything together. Everywhere they went together, recalled Mary Ann Lawrence, age 88, the only surviving Piper sibling. They were normal, average boys. They happened to be the first twins to graduate from the Creston High School in 1942. After that, they went on to work for the Burlington Railroad out of Lincoln, Nebraska during the winter of 1942-43. They didn't stay in Lincoln very long, though. Although they were only 17, Henry and Louis enlisted in the Naval Reserve in Omaha on February 27, 1943. During World War II, Nebraska, and the rest of the United States, dropped everything to contribute to the war effort. Soon enough, naval ammunition depots, bomber plants, air bases, and scrap metal drives were springing up all over the country, including in Nebraska. Nebraska was home to some unique wartime efforts, like the North Platte Canteen. Fresh out of the Great Depression, the economy of Nebraska, and the U.S. as a whole, was revived by wartime production. In July of 1942, the largest naval ammunition depot, NAD, was being constructed right in Hastings, Nebraska. The 48,000-acre facility sent out its first shipment of ammunition on July 4, 1943. Since it was located smack dab in the middle of the country, Hastings was the perfect spot for the facility. It was out of range of German and Japanese aircraft, had an endless supply of water, and could ship supplies by railroad to each coast within 2 days. At one point during the war, 40% of the Navy's ammunition was produced in Hastings. Considering they were only 17, Henry and Louis's parents had to give their consent for them to enlist in the Navy, and so they enlisted as apprentice seamen. On March 7, 1943, they were sent to Omaha to report for active duty and were then transferred to the U.S. Naval Training Station in Great Lakes, Illinois. On May 27th, the twins entered radioman school at the University of Chicago. It was there that they learned Morse code and U.S. Navy communication and radio theory. On November 5th that year, Henry and Louis graduated from radioman school, class of 162. They were then assigned to Landing Ship Tank 523, LST 523, together. They were about to be part of World War II's most significant battle. The LST 523 was part of the fleet carrying soldiers as well as supplies across the English Channel on D-Day, June 6, 1944. But long before D-Day, on January 7th, the twins had to report to the supervisor of shipbuilding at the U.S. Navy Jeffersonville Boat and Machine Company in Jeffersonville, Indiana. On January 25th, they boarded the ship bound for New Orleans, Louisiana. After traveling down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the fleet arrived on February 2nd, and the next day their ship was placed on full commission. From there, LST 523 joined a large convoy of 60 to 75 ships that crossed the Atlantic Ocean within a month. Henry and Louis took part in the D-Day invasion as radiomen second class on that same landing ship. When the Normandy campaign began on June 6th, the LST 523, nicknamed Stardust, made the first of 3 round trips from England to the beaches in Normandy. On the first voyage, Stardust couldn't get close to Omaha Beach because of the debris and swells. So what they did was unload the men and equipment into smaller boats, return to England, and aided in the care of about 175 Allied casualties. On the second voyage, Stardust hit the shore of Utah Beach and unloaded their men. They then loaded around 200 Allied casualties and several German POWs and returned to England. 13 days after D-Day, the ship got caught in the midst of a violent storm. On June 18th, LST 523 left England loaded with men, vehicles, equipment, and explosives. Stardust then proceeded towards Utah Beach for its third trip. But the weather in the English Channel is very unpredictable, and the ship was met with a gale force wind that erupted unexpectedly in the early hours of June 19th. Stardust, one of the 3 ships in the convoy, arrived off the coast of Normandy during the storm. Stardust was trailing LST-27, but as they moved towards the shore, LST-27's anchor got caught in the wreckage and signaled Stardust forward to take her place in line. A little after 1 p.m., LST-523 started towards the beach, but hit an underwater magnetic mine on the way. The explosion occurred in the middle of the ship. Many of those on board were in the mess line and thus were killed instantly. 2 of the other ships in the convoy sent several small boats to rescue survivors before they were lost in the cold sea. The survivors were rescued by 20 small craft that appeared on the scene. These ships sank within minutes, meaning over 200 U.S. servicemen's lives were lost. Among them were the Piper twins, who were 19 years old. After the explosion, rescuers found Louis's body, but Henry's wasn't found. Henry thus became one of World War II's tens of thousands labeled as MIA, missing in action. Louis's body was buried under a white cross at Normandy American Cemetery. Henry's name was inscribed on the walls of the missing at the same cemetery. But no one ever found his body, and it was considered lost with the ship at the bottom of the English Channel. For decades, the Piper family heard nothing. However, Henry's remains were eventually discovered, although they remained unidentified. He was then buried at another military cemetery in Belgium, and for decades his body was labeled Unknown X9352. That is, until Vanessa Taylor and her teacher came along. Thanks to Taylor's hard work, the Piper family would finally be able to get closure. Taylor's research for the project involved making requests to the U.S. government for personnel files on the brothers, which happened to catch the attention of officials at the Defense WWII accounting agency, which tracks soldiers who have been prisoners of war or missing in action. The agency drew a link between Henry, the missing twin, and the remains of 6 unidentified sailors who were found by French divers who dismantled a sunken ship off Omaha Beach in 1961. The French divers found the remains of a sailor in the ship's radio room, which is where Henry would have been when they hit the mine. The unidentified remains were buried in 1965 at the Ardennes American Cemetery in Belgium. Then, a man named Tim Nozzle from the American Battle Monuments Commission in Virginia got involved. He said they're always looking for America's missing soldiers, but this was an incredible coincidence. Nozzle explained, "We were looking at all the information we have on the unknowns in our cemeteries when, at the same time, a high school student in Nebraska was doing research. It's almost like a new piece of the puzzle came across the table." Nozzle said that the information helped them put pieces together. The remains of the body were positively identified as Henry Piper's in November of 2017. Using X-ray and dental records, a DNA match wasn't necessary. In mid-November, Mary Ann Lawrence and her daughter Susan got a call from the Navy at their home in Fair Oaks, California. "I was shocked and surprised and happy," Mary Ann said. The twins' sister wasted no time in deciding where Henry's body should be. "They were born together. They wanted to be together," said Mary Ann. The Piper sister, who recently passed away, said she couldn't forget the day 2 Navy men in uniform came to Creston. They were knocking on doors asking for directions to the Piper home. "The neighbors knew before we did because it was a small town," she said. "I was babysitting for someone. I walked in. My mom was sitting in the chair crying." Mary Ann recalled that the twins wrote to their parents not too long before they died. Their words were, "Do not worry about us, we are together." The family was told of the twins' deaths, but no one from the military ever told the Pipers about the excavation of the wreck of LST-523 in 1961. Vanessa Taylor later interviewed Mary Ann Lawrence and visited Creston. The Lawrences, Taylor and Flynn, learned that Henry's body was identified a few days before Thanksgiving. "It was like the biggest burden lifted off her shoulders. She was just carrying it all this time," Mary Ann stated. What happened to the brother, and to have him identified and know he was found? It was the biggest blessing for Thanksgiving we could have possibly had. The family asked the Monuments Commission to bury the twins side by side in the cemetery above Omaha Beach. Louis's body was then moved to a space where it could be reburied beside that of Henry. In the end, the American Battle Monuments Commission went out of its way to make the twins' posthumous reunion happen. On June 19, 2018, 74 years to the day after the twins were killed off the coast of Normandy, Louis and Henry Piper were finally laid to rest, side by side, in the Normandy American Cemetery. It was time. After 6 months of work, Taylor and Flynn visited Normandy and the gravesite, where Taylor delivered a eulogy for the twins. "It was so moving," Flynn said. "It was really unforgettable." Henry and Louis's names were also etched on a memorial in the Creston Cemetery. According to the Defense POW-MIA accounting agency, by the end of World War II, about 79,000 Americans were left unaccounted for. Today, more than 72,000 remain unaccounted for. Many bodies have been identified, however, Nozzle stated. And once they are, the families usually deport their bodies to the United States. Nozzle also said Henry Piper was the first missing soldier to be identified and buried in the Normandy Cemetery that holds over 9,300 graves. "People will be talking about the Piper twins and visiting their graves for as long as this cemetery exists," he said. 5 million visitors come through this cemetery every year. There's a strong message here for the world of what these men sacrificed their lives for. As the burial cemetery, taps were played as 6 men carried Henry's flag-draped coffin between the rows of white crosses and stars of David. The Piper family members sat in a row of chairs on the grass. 6 nieces and nephews of the twins came from America to witness the burial of the heroes they never got to meet. One of their nephews was Lewis Henry Piper, named after both twins, whose father died before learning of the discovery of his missing siblings' remains. He knew that one of the brothers was buried in Normandy and the other one was unknown, said the nephew. It was always a wound in his heart, not knowing where his brother was, so he never talked about it. The eldest niece and next of kin is Linda Piper Suter. She was presented with the flag from Henry's coffin after the ceremony and said how the event has changed her life. I think I found a new purpose for my life. I'm going home and I'm going to visit high schools and share this story and make sure students know about this history project. I'm going to tell them what it's meant to me and my family. Taylor's project incorporated a newspaper clipping from the summer of 1944, which showed how 300 people turned out for the twins' memorial ceremony in their little Nebraska town. Henry and Louis turned out to be the first sons of Creston to perish in the war, according to the article. In Taylor's project, she wrote that the whole thing changed her life in more ways than she can count. I started this project with a vague perspective on World War II and came out of it with more facts and statistics than I know what to do with, she said in her eulogy for the Piper twins. She described how, at first, the names of the twins were just that, names. But now I'm so thankful that they've become heroes in my eyes. While the project was exciting for her, her teacher, and those involved, it was nonetheless sad for Taylor to know that many will never hear of these two brave men or many silent heroes like them. Even before the U.S. joined the Second World War, President Roosevelt was looking forward to Midwestern states as locations for Army air bases. Since the coasts were vulnerable to air attacks, it meant that the area between the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains were the primary target for building new military air bases. Nebraska was particularly promising because of its excellent year-round flying conditions, as well as the fact that the areas were mostly vacant. Before the end of the war, 12 Army air bases, or satellite airfields, were built in Nebraska, including one in Ainsworth, Taylor's hometown. Nebraska was one of the many states that got caught up in the patriotic enthusiasm that came with scrap metal drives. The scrap metal drives would save tinfoil from gun wrappers, old nails, and all else that they could be deemed even remotely metal. By 1942, Nebraskans proudly noted that they filled 111% of their quota and even finished 14th in the country. The way they looked at it, they were doing what they could do to help the war effort. Even American coins were contributed to the drives. Copper and new zinc-coated steel pennies were issued in 1943. Then the North Platte Canteen, which was a volunteer effort of colossal proportions, was initiated. It brought together Nebraskans from over 125 different communities, serving more than 6 million troops during World War II. On December 17, 1941, families of the local Nebraska National Guard Company D stood on the train platform to give their boys and men their Christmas presents. Yet, as the train arrived and the anxiously awaiting parents and spouses scanned the cars for their men, they realized it was Company D from the Kansas National Guard. One person stepped toward anyway and gave their Christmas gifts to those troops instead. It ended up sparking an idea that continued for the rest of the war. By Christmas Day, the idea had already spread, and a local group of women were waiting with presents for the troops coming in on the train. After that, a canteen was set up in an empty shop across the street. For the remainder of the war, women from communities across Nebraska donated their time and ration stamps to make baskets full of gifts for every train that stopped in North Platte. Once the war was in full swing, as many as 24 trains stopped in North Platte each and every day. It meant that a stream of workers was needed. By the time the canteen closed at the end of the war, over 55,000 volunteers had become part of the canteen. Throughout the course of World War II, 30,053 Nebraskans enlisted or were drafted into the U.S. Army. Of them, 2,976 never returned. Lewis and Henry Piper, radio men second class for the U.S. Navy, are among the lost.